I am now pleased to introduce our opening speaker for today. Senator Jordon Steele-John is a lifelong disability advocate and social justice campaigner. As Australia's youngest senator, Jordon's entry to Parliament did cause some lamentably hasty renovations to make Parliament House wheelchair accessible. With the Disability Abuse Royal Commission underway, Senator Steele-John will share his perspective on how we can build our power to influence and become decision makers. Please welcome for his presentation, Influencing Decision Makers, Senator Jordon Steele-John.
All right, let's. This is off to a good start. All right. We're looking for somewhere in the middle. So. Hello. Yes.
Yep, sorry.
Sorry. That is the vote. It's not.
Try that button now, Jordan. Should be better, I hope.
All right, now.
Yes. No. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. All right, did that work? Hey, we got there in the end. Okay, let me position this properly so that I'm not weirdly leaning forward like an orbit ball. All right, that everyone can hear that. Excellent. Okay, so after that little interruption, it is, let me just say, so bloody wonderful to be with you all this morning, to be able to participate in this conference this afternoon. I want to acknowledge that we are, of course, meeting today in this beautiful venue on such a lovely day on the lands of First Nations people. Pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty over this land was never ceded. When we as disabled people consider the challenges and barriers that exist in our society, it is so important to remember that for First Nations folks with disabilities, disabled First Nations folks, those challenges are made all the harder by the intersection of race, racism and ableism in our society. It's really important to remember. I have weird feelings being back in this room with this organisation. I joined the board of PWdWA in like 2012, I think. You know, like all people of about 17 or 18, I saw an administrative committee for a non-government organisation and went, that's where I'll go on a Thursday. I was so popular. And look, it was, I think, one of the best things I've ever done. I had the opportunity to meet excellent people like Sam Jenkinson, Samantha Connor, Lisa Barrett, who is going to be with us, Burnett, sorry, who'll be with us this afternoon. And it was a excellent crash course in what systemic advocacy looks like and what a good disability organisation is and can do. And it is wonderful to be back here, the best part of 10 years in some ways since that moment. I'm getting old. To talk with you all at what I really feel is a critical moment for us as a community. The last 20 years of disability activism in Australia has been a process of us as a community coming to terms with the limitation of purely regulatory solutions to deeply cultural problems in our society. We've seen a 20-year period of time where many of the metrics, particularly around education and inclusion in the workforce, have actually gone backwards or deeply stagnated. Here in WA, if you look at a simple policy area of what is our target for disability employment here in the state, it is woeful. We have states over east aiming for 12% disability employment. I think we're somewhere like 5%. Really low bar nonsense that has come about through a stagnation in the connection of the major parties to disability issues and to the disability rights movement. At the same time, we have continued to push as a community through particularly the last decade, and I think have rediscovered and reconnected with our power as a community, as a movement, as a force for change, the goal of which is the radical transformation of our society. We have sought to bring into being legislative frameworks like the NDIS, seeking to make material those collective commitments that we have made as a society to uphold and sustain the rights of us as disabled people. And we continued the work together of telling the stories needed, highlighting the incredible abuses that have taken place and still take place in our society that we experience day in, day out as disabled people. Now, that work was not quick and is most certainly ongoing. But I think as we gather here this afternoon, it is worth reflecting on the incredible achievement that is the establishment of our Disability Royal Commission. It comes on the back of the best part of a decade, in many ways, multiple decades of campaign work by incredible, bolshy disability advocates that forced folks not to turn away from the reality of our everyday experiences, from the reality of ableism in our lives. They forced journalists to engage, particularly the ABC. Together, we then forced MPs to engage and to establish a Senate inquiry investigation into this issue in 2014-15. And then made sure that we actually did the work, the emotional labour of telling our stories to that inquiry process so that we were damn sure that the recommendation would be that there needed to be a Royal Commission established. And then once that recommendation was made, we continued to work as a community, nationally, united towards the goal of the establishment of that investigative body. And that is, I think we cannot for a moment underestimate the momentousness of that achievement because it has created a tool that we are now able as a community to take into our hands and to wield for the purpose of bringing down the barriers that are created and sustained by ableism, that are created and sustained by the discrimination in our society. It will not get there on its own and cannot, as we have seen at many moments, be left to its own devices, lest it drift off course, because there is obviously still a lot of non-disabled folks involved in that process. But what we have now, at the beginning of this decade, is a mechanism through which we are able to hold individual perpetrators to account for the abuse, for the exploitation, for the violence, and to also hold to account those in positions of power who either knew and did nothing or should have known. And it is through those processes of holding people to account, of getting the story clearly told, of having the evidence on the record, that we are able then to build the case for change over this 3-year period that the Commission will be running. In that context, I think it is really important to remember that it is our coming together and organising as a community that enabled this moment to be created in the Commission. It was not something that was achieved solely through one form of activism or one form of engagement with politicians, but in fact a multiple set of approaches from people all over the country. And when it comes to the question of how do we influence decision makers, how do we become decision makers, I will give you this central observation from my time in Parliament. It is about the extent of the pressure that you are able to apply to those folks in decision-making spaces. We as disabled people were able to achieve this Commission process not only because of a deep academic and policy development process over many years, but critically by actually descending on Canberra, taking the place over a bit in a couple of the critical days when the legislation was being considered, and literally bursting into the offices of different MPs from both sides of politics, slightly facilitated by me, but to actually make sure that the issue was properly understood and the need for action was properly understood. And I think this can provide us with a very clear template for what we need to do as advocacy organisations and individuals campaigning for change as we move forward together. Firstly, I think it is really important that we as disabled people invest in ourselves and invest in our community. In events like this, in gatherings like this, in coming together, connecting and celebrating our culture, celebrating our continued struggle against the barriers in our lives, and being proud of our disability community and of our identity as disabled people. I am bloody proud to proclaim myself a disabled person, extraordinarily proud to share a room with disabled people and incredible activists. And I think we as a community should give ourselves the opportunity to reflect on that and build that sense of shared identity, because from that shared identity comes the energy and the mutual support that is needed to keep a long campaign for systemic change going. Second to that, it is so important that we make use of the traditional tools of community organising that have worked so well in the women's rights movement, in the labour rights movement, in the movements for racial equality and justice, those key aspects of building your networks of support, making sure that you are organized both in the physical spaces and digitally online, and building particularly email lists so that you're able to walk in or roll in to a politician's office and go, I don't really care whether you think the issue that we are campaigning on is important. I have a list of 200,000 people in critical swing electorates all across the country that definitely think it does. So I think you better vote for this legislation. That is how lobbying gets done in Parliament. That's how the corporate bodies do their work. They make an argument, but really it's about the power you bring into the room, the size of the stick that you bring into the room, into those discussions. Because that is ultimately what moves the decision makers that we currently have. So that utilizing those techniques is incredibly important. And then finally, I think it is really important that we become as comfortable as possible with being annoying. Being annoying is so important. Agitating, being inconvenient, getting in the way, causing a fuss. These are the tactics, these are the techniques, this is the mindset that defines successful social justice movements. We have a right to be annoying. The discrimination that we face is not okay. The fact that intellectually disabled folks have a life expectancy 25 years less than the rest of the population is not okay. The fact that disabled women experience sexual violence at the rate that they do is not okay. The fact that a disabled person trying to get a job at this point in time might as well sprout wings and fly is not okay. And the fact that so many of us die in our homes at the hands of folks paid to support us is not okay. And so we have a right, to be annoying, to turn ourselves into an MP's worst nightmare, to challenge that chief of staff to chuck us out of the office if they're brave enough, particularly when agencies and organisations, cough, cough, the NDIS, cough, cough, set up to support us, set up to do the work, set up because we campaigned for them, turn around and then go and introduce something like independent compulsory assessments without even having talked to us. Oh, we have a right to be annoying about that. So it is with this sense of pride, with this sense of shared identity, bound together and supported by these age-old tools of activism, confident in our right to be annoying and irritating, arm in arm together as we lock on and lock out, sit in. We're already sitting, so that starts it. It is with these techniques, these tactics, this mindset that we will achieve the transformation that is so urgently needed, and that we will gain the justice for those that are not in this room today. It is with these tools that we will get justice for them. Write their names on the walls, put them up on the memorials, make them known, and remember them. In the knowledge that the society that we create will mean for those that come after us an accessible and inclusive community for everyone. Thank you very much.
Folks, would you please once again give your thanks to Senator Jordon Steele-John.
I definitely do use up the time. time for questions, didn't I?
No, you actually haven't. No, we've got a fair bit of time up our sleeve. If you'd like to.
I would love to take questions.
Okay, well let Laura get herself equipped with a microphone for the audience.
I think Sam's also up. You say you wanted to. Oh, excellent. Lovely.
Okay, let's get this awkward thing back in place.
Yeah, cool.
Testing.
All right. Who want any questions? Yes, excellent. I'll try to keep it a progressive speaking list, so we'll go kind of like share the air kind of thing. So yes, you did tell me your name. I'm so sorry.
Yes, I'm Tara. I'm from the People with Disabilities WA committee and very privileged to be on the committee. Look, I'm just wanting to know what your thoughts on the prescription of neuropleptics and psychiatric medications for people that may have dual disabilities, and the fact of I think we've deinstitutionalised disabilities and mental health challenges out in the community, and I'd like your thoughts on restrictive practice. I mean, we don't confine people in institutions, but we do chemically confine people nowadays, and there seems to be little conversation about that or little advocacy in that area. And it seems the mental health, homeless and disability platform are very polarised and separate and siloed. And I would like to know if that's a conversation we could have another time.
Well, I could talk under wet concrete about that particular issue. Just checking the mic. Yep. Okay, cool. So I think that there's a couple of things we need to address there. Firstly, I think we have to be cautious of declaring mission accomplished when it comes to the deinstitutionalisation of our community. My fear is actually that the institutionalisation is a product of the positioning of a group within a society, right? It's maintained and supported by those discriminatory ways of thinking. And so I worry, because we all know that those ways of thinking are still quite prevalent and normalised, that actually what we're just seeing is the rebranding of institutionalisation rather than the ending of it. So there's that. I think when it comes to the issue of restricted practice, or the unauthorised use of restricted practice, I think language here is really important. I was speaking with a couple of folks that I work with, that volunteer with me, about this issue, and with a couple of experts in the field, and they made the point that I kept talking about, restricted practice, and because it had been considered in a Royal Commission hearing. There was a whole hearing dedicated to the question, and they just said to me, "Look, Jordon, why are you using that language? It's actually just torture. Like, if you're talking about an unauthorised use of restrict, you're talking about torture.
Let's call it violence. I prefer to actually call it acts of violence.
Yeah. Like we've got to be careful of this kind of normalising language. I think it's a huge problem, particularly here in WA, where we've had no bloody framework around it ever. The Quality and Safeguards Commission, which doesn't cover WA yet, in force, has seen a massive level of unauthorised restricted practice, and I think it comes down to a multiple layer of factors: dehumanisation of the people you work with, going to what is seen as the easy option, all of those different things that need to be addressed. On the flip side, I think it's really important not to demonise or in any way discriminate against folks that may need to take medications, because like that, if you're choosing to do it because it's helpful for you, go. So I think we've got to be balanced in that thought process, but it is just not again, going back to the theme of not okay. It is not okay that we see these rates of unauthorised use of restricted practice. And then some of the excuses that are given, again, particularly in WA, for the rate of use is unacceptable, in my view. So, yes, I would be most certainly up for an ongoing conversation around that. Thank you. There's a young lad, thin individual. I don't know why I said that. That's
No, I'm good. Lad's fine. Absolute
probably
mad.
older than me. Sorry.
Absolute mad lad. So do I have to keep it to one question?
Well,
Preferably?
yes, go on.
Okay, so in the talk that we've been having a lot about unemployment with people with disabilities, it's really got me thinking about, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Andrew Yang.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
my man.
know where you're going. There's a member of the Yang Gang in the house.
Yang Gang.
Yeah. So, American political candidate from the last cycle. So I'm imagining you want to talk about universal basic income.
Yes.
Yay, we got it. All right. So, one thing needs to be said really clearly about disability and employment. In Australia today, right now, there are 20,000 people at least working in settings framed as work environments where they are paid dollars and cents on the hours. They are called Australian Disability Enterprises, and they have no place in the future of the question of disability and employment in this country. They must be driven out as a model. It is not work. It is not framed around the purpose of work. It is a program that has been allowed to continue over time in flagrant violation of our rights as disabled people. There needs to be a well-managed, human rights-driven transition plan for people that are working in or are participating in those programs, because it's not fair. Like, they didn't create the institution that then they have been in for the last, some of them, decades. So there does need to be a transition plan, but we cannot continue to see young people move from segregated education, from special ed units, into segregated work, being paid cents on the hour, through to segregated housing. That is the process of institutionalization. That is where the death comes from. You can't have natural safeguards in an institutionalized setting. It just does not work. We're going to end violence, abuse, and neglect in this country. We have to be willing to confront the normalized structures that we've allowed to continue in this country that create the environment where it takes place. So that's the number one thing. Secondary to a UBI, like, there are so many models for a UBI around. Yang put forward, I think, a particularly American model. I lean most towards a universal well-being payment. I think language in this area is actually really important around what are we doing. And I think on that question of what the hell are we doing, we are disconnecting, finally. We are disconnecting the ability of a human being to sell their labour in the marketplace at an hourly rate high enough for them to be able to afford to eat and put a roof over their head from their ability to do those things. The question of whether you should be able to have food in your belly, a roof over your head, turn the lights on and see a doctor should in no way be connected to your ability to sell your labour in the marketplace. And that's what a UBI allows us to do. It allows us as a community to say, do you know what? Poverty is not okay. Homelessness is not okay. Malnutrition in children is not okay. We're not going to do that anymore. We will collectively ensure that people have what they need, the basics that they need to live a good life. And then beyond that, we will support you to define what is a fulfilling life on your terms. That is what a UBI allows us to do. And that's why I think some form is so important. The exact specificities of it, I think we could debate for days, but the principle is really important. We've got a person over there.
So, on that quickly, where I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts in terms of, you said that we could debate this all day to figure it out. What are your thoughts on starting a commitment to define a UBI?
Well, the Greens have, it's something that we support conceptually. We haven't quite been able to land on a model that we think would work in the Australian context, but we're definitely trying to do it. And we can talk after about it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. There is a wheat belt. Somebody from the community wheat belt thing up the back. Somebody from the community wheat belt thing. I'm so sorry. The organisation is actually superb. I just can't remember the full name.
I'm Tina.
No, I can remember your name, Tina. The Wheat Belt Project.
Wheat Belt Health Network.
Thing.
So
Sorry,
the Wheat Belt Health Network have done a Humans of the Wheat Belt program where we interview people with a disability. The interviewer has a disability or the writer of the story has a disability. It's an amazing program, so Facebook it, Humans of the Wheat Belt. But my friend Michelle wants to ask you a question, Senator.
Hi.
Hi.
In terms of housing, what has been done about access to housing for people with disabilities without it costing more than what people can afford?
Really good question. So there's a couple of things happening simultaneously. Or indeed not happening simultaneously. So the NDIS has driven a large investment in what is known as supported disability accommodation, SDA, and that is seeing dwellings that are fully accessible, set up so a support worker could live into, all of those standard attributes being built here in WA, which is in some ways a good thing, but also we need to watch it carefully. Because, if you're building 5 dwellings to a blah, oh, yes, this could take 5 people. It's actually, if you're not careful, a micro-institution, particularly if you then add in questions around whether your SDA provider and your supported independent living provider are the same organisation, in which case, good luck having meaningful support and control. Oh, that's nice. You would like an internet connection. How fun. We're going to put that idea on the fridge. That's a really thing we've got to be careful of. On the other side of the ledger, we're actually making it worse when it comes to the design standards that we have here in Australia for housing generally. Now, you'll often hear this statement, but if we made it accessible, it'd be so expensive. No disabled person would ever be able to afford. It's nonsense. The way that we build housing in this country, the way we build anything, I'm not a capitalist at all. I haven't studied economics, but I do understand the concept of economies of scale. And the way that we build housing and infrastructure in an inaccessible way is as cheap as it is because we have allowed it to be built that way, and it has therefore achieved the economy of scale. More people have used it, and so the price of it has come down. And so when we think about what needs to change in access standards, we can't look at the current cost of that individual item because at the moment it's bespoke. We have to consider and attempt to forecast forward what it would be if it was the baseline access for everybody. And that's what the Greens are pushing for. We want to build, we want a significant national investment in public housing all across the country because we have allowed the housing market to become a market where people play with your ability to either own a home or rent a home like it's chips in a goddamn casino. And that, again, is not okay, because housing is a human right. And so our position is a national investment. We're talking hundreds of thousands of public houses over the next decade, every single one of them built to the highest possible access standard, so that those building techniques and technologies achieve that economy of scale, and we actually stop building inaccessibility into our housing stock at last.
Thank you.
Does anybody have a question about the intersection of disability and sexuality? Because there's a session on that, which I can't attend because I'm running the other session. But it's an issue that I'm extraordinarily... Does anybody have a question in that area or no? Oh, bugger. All right. Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, well, yeah, true. Sam just reminded me that there are actually a comprehensive set of building code consultations that are currently underway that do present the opportunity for people to give their feedback on what changes should be in the code. Definitely do that, because the more people that we have... Maddie will have the details. I can't remember them off the top of my head. But yeah, I am doing a bit of background work around that. Most certainly, yes. Good point, Sam. Sandra. Sorry.
Hi, Gordon. I'm in state housing, but my solution to that is still, if we state housing, to build all the houses disabled-proof.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
So that when time comes when we're older, we won't have to move.
Yep.
So, and also, the thing about the institutional workplaces, I call that slavery.
Absolutely. Well, what else are we meant to call it? You know? I know it's not like it's, you know, we in those spaces are often doing things like manufacturing headphones into packets for Qantas, one of the most profitable and one of the most prolific tax dodgers in Australia. So, yeah, no, not okay. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Catherine. I was just wondering, compared to like other huge social justice movements that are out there today, like Black Lives Matter and all that kind of thing, like what is it that makes the disability rights movement not heard as much compared to those movements? Yeah, sure.
What is your initial thought, and then I'll chip in. No, yourself. Yeah.
Okay.
What do you think? What's your thought?
Okay. So I'm a third generation person with a disability. My great uncle. He, at the age of 2, was institutionalised because he was totally blind, and back in the 1900s, it was conceived that if you had a child with a disability, you had sinned something terribly. And so therefore it was a great shame on the family, and not just because of a physical disability, but a sensory disability. People were locked away and were treated so appallingly. Things have, through my parents and through the advocacy that I have done over the past, things have changed. I mean, for example, in the blind movement, it has taken us 40 plus years to be able to vote independently in our state and national electoral systems. And I mean, that was a right for so many people back in the 1900s. And we didn't have that. Our perception of our power is squashed by people's ignorance and people's fear of what might happen. Right from our rights as human beings to be included and to be accepted. Just a side note, I went to a day surgery this week, and because it had on the paperwork that I was vision impaired, I was in a separate room. I was not allowed to walk to where I had to go for surgery. I had to be put in a wheelchair. Everybody else was walking. The room they put me in was the room that they use when they have prisoners.
Yep.
It was the most sterile and I just felt gutted.
Yep.
Because it's my eyes, it's not my brain or my legs.
Yep.
And I'm not a criminal. Well, maybe in my youth.
Well, not a
and
prolific
that's
criminal.
the perception
Yes.
that we have to build. We have to get through to the general community. Even though I advocated and said, "Hey, I can walk," and the response was, "Oh yeah, but it's a lot of paperwork to fill out if you trip over."
Oh, mate.
55 years I've been doing this. I think
know.
I've kind of got a handle on it.
Well, so I think I think that our movement is simply at a different stage. From my study of social justice movements globally, there are some. I mean, each of them have differences because of the differences and diversities of the community that create and sustain them. But there are definite phases that you can identify. And I think, as overused as it is, that kind of Gandhi phrase of, first they laugh at you, then they ignore you, then they fight you, then you win. That there's a rough framework there for the stages that a movement goes through. And I think our disability rights movement is at this very moment emerging from the moment of being laughed at, if you know what I mean, which for us, it's not laughed at, it's actually patted on the back. It's actually, I do love disabled people. It's so good to see them out in the community. I met one the other day I didn't even know. I wouldn't have even known. That kind of people that work in the sector, they're great. They've got a heart of gold. They do such a hard job, and absolutely support work can be a hard job. But there is that undertone of benign love of disabled people. Sadly, actually not made better by the annual celebration of it in Telethon, which is a whole nother thing. But like that kind of, we're cuddly, and the whole goal is to keep us safe, warm and fed, and then we'll be fine. And actually, it's gross. It's so gross. And no, we are criminal, vibrant, bullshit, irritating radicals. Piss off. We're not cuddling. Don't hug me and tell me that you're praying for me. I didn't ask. So we are moving from that moment. And if anybody goes to the Fremantle Maritime Museum, by the way, there is randomly, I have no idea why it's particularly there, but there's a pamphlet from 1900. And it's from the Committee for the Prevention of Female Enfranchisement. And it says that female enfranchisement is a danger to women because why would we want to give them the extra work to do? They would only vote the same way as their husbands. This is about protecting them from unnecessary burden. And that was if you look back at the way that patriarchy and misogyny operated openly at that particular time, it was very much from the space of women are fragile creatures that represent the wonder of the human spirit, you know. Let's just keep them wrapped up in petticoats and flowers. The sweet little kittens, aren't they pretty? And then there was a moment of that through to ignore, and then damn well right through to fight, you know. And if you ever have a conversation with somebody about an access need, and they go, oh yeah, no, definitely is accessible. Everybody can get through the door. And you go, yeah, that's not quite what I meant. What I meant was, is there an accessible loo? And you see that moment where they go, oh no, but then get defensive. And then if you push back, suddenly you're the ungrateful one. You're the ungrateful cripple. You know, you're lucky we let you in here. Your face makes me feel sick. You know, like when you push to go, actually, no, this is what I need. And then you go further than that and say, this is what I need, and I'm not going to thank you for it. Ooh, how dare you be ungrateful for me going out of my way? That's where we're getting to now. When we're saying, actually, no, you will pay us our full damn dollar, just like everyone else. You will make this accessible. And if you haven't, you'll spend the $3 billion that it takes to fix your mistake. And I'm not going to send you a thank you card at the end. And I'm certainly not going to let Basil Zemplers hug me on TV. Or anywhere else. My God, let us not vote that man back in. But yes, we are getting to that moment. And you see it in the political space when they're like, oh, we're giving you what you want, go away. So I think that's how we've come to be there. Well, that is where we are. How we come to be there is a lack of that shared identity. Like, because of the shame. From the minute we're born, our parents, particularly, are told that they have born into the world a broken child. And that brokenness is their fault. And something that they will then have to struggle with the burden of for the rest of their life. And that brokenness is created by putting that child up to a mirror and going, see that normal person there? That's what you should be like. That's what you should be like. That's what I should have had. I should have had one of them. And that then gets passed on to us. And we internalize the ableism. We internalize the self-hate. We internalize the idea that we are lesser than. And therefore, of course, we would be grateful for an accommodation. Thank you so much. There was no need, you know? And we don't want to be often with each other. We don't want to be in a room with disabled people. That's not cool. We want to just be normal. We want to strive to get back to that state of normalcy that we should have always been in, because that's what's safe and empowering. And I think the opportunity, and that is so common for, that's something that movements for racial justice experience, movements in the women's rights, they've all had those discourses and those moments. And I think this is the opportunity for us to step into our power and identity as disabled people, to stand before ourselves, to look into that mirror and say, I am a disabled person and I am proud and I am enough. And you will hear me when I speak. That is the kind of opportunity that we have now. And I think then we will bang up against it even more. But let's go, is my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, you want to throw down? Let's throw down.
Yep. Well, yeah, as someone with a disability, I'd like to thank you very much for raising the bar for the fight and making it heard.
No worries. I can't wait to storm the accessible barricade with all of us together.
Me too. I'll join you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Folks, you've just applauded, and rightly so. Please join me in expressing my sincere thanks to Senator Jordon Steele-John.